Welcome to the Metamorphosis Podcast, where we explore the possibilities and processes of personal and community transformation based on the ancient wisdom of Kemet, one of many classical African civilizations, as a foundation. I am Dr. Catherine Lynn Adams, an associate professor of African and African American Studies at Claflin University, where I teach courses on oral and literary traditions of the African world, with an emphasis on interviewing and archiving the stories of our elders. I am serving as a scribe for this project. Joining me is Baba Derrick Jackson. Baba Derrick is the priest and thought leader of Christ Universal Temple, a spiritual community in South Carolina. Who do you remember as your best friend when you were growing up?
Now, that's not a problem. His name was Robert Brown. We went through second because my first grade was in in Columbia. And we went through second to eighth grade together. Ninth grade, excuse me. We parted at high school. He went to what used to be called Benjamin Franklin High School, and which was in Manhattan, which is where I was supposed to go, right? Based on the district we lived in, but I went to a school in the Bronx, DeWitt Clinton High School, because I wanted to play sports. I wanted to play football. And that was the school you wanted to go if you wanted to play football or any sport, actually. DeWitt Clinton High School had over 50 sports. By my junior year there, they had 7,200 all boys. If you walked on the campus of DeWitt Clinton, it looked like any small college or university, the way the campus was laid out, because it has quite a history. Baldwin went to that high school. Hubert Harrison went to that high school. And people like the guy used to play for the Minnesota named Ron Behagen, played basketball for that high school. Guy went to Marquette, who I knew very well, named Butch Lee. Butch Lee has the fame of being turned down by the American Olympic team when he was old enough to be in the Olympics and he was playing at Marquette. So because his mother was Puerto Rican, he went and played for the Puerto Rican team. And even though they lost to the United States, Butch Lee scored 50 points on the United States. And I think he did that. Knowing him, I've never been able to ask him this question, but knowing him, that was on purpose. He was a younger guy. He was younger than I was, so.
What position did you play in high school?
Offense and defense, tackle, both ways.
You mentioned James Baldwin, and I was thinking, what are some of the things that you remember reading when you were in high school?
Oh, and it's funny because my wife and I were talking about our high school reading list, right? And because of all the conversation these days about banning books and the reasons for banning them, And we were just talking about some of the books we read in high school. They, according to these days, should have been banned, because I read Down These Mean Streets. I read Man Child in the Promised Land. I was reading Lord of the Flies, Portnoy's Complaint, Catch 22. I mean, On the Waterfront. I mean, Steinbeck's books of Mice and Men. So those are kind of the books we were reading. Even a book two books that became movies, and we had to read them before they became movies: The Exorcist and The Godfather.
What are some of the things from those earliest memories do you think absolutely show up in the person that you are today?
Hmm.
You mentioned the time spent with your grandmother, certainly time with family. Are there some other memories that are just foundational to who you are right now?
If I look back and pull up those memories, and if I was to put it in a word, it was the relationships that I had over that time period, and especially those relationships with my female cousins who were like sisters to me. And those relationships meant a lot, still do mean a lot. Although one of them have transitioned to be with the ancestors. She transitioned the same year my mother transitioned in 2005. And my cousin Chicky, whose house I grew up in, and then I have a cousin Deb, and she's the one that transitioned in 2005. Whose house, her mother. And it was interesting here, for at least to me. Her mother and my mother are first cousins. Her father and my father are brothers. So two brothers married two first cousins. So we used to call each other double cuz, right? And so, and then she would, my cousin Deb would introduce me to her next door neighbor, because they lived in Westchester, New York, in a little town called Peekskill. And her name was Diane Ritter. And so whenever I was around my cousin Deb, I was also around her friend, Diane. And Diane is the one that I have to say introduced me to Sonia Sanchez, Angela Davis, all of the big time writers of that time period, Nikki Giovanni, because she was the radical in the group. If you was to meet Diane Ritter today, you would never think of her being that kind of radical. But back in the late 60s, early 70s, she was. She rose up in New York to be the assistant state controller, I think, at one point. But in those days, that was her.
There's one thing that I would like you to maybe reflect on, and it has to do with, is it a duality? Is it something that's complementary? The Southern experience, and then what I'm hearing is the Southern experience in Harlem.
Absolutely. Newark, New Jersey, Harlem, New York, probably when I was growing up, may not be true now, but when I was growing up, probably had the largest contingency of ex-South Carolinians there were any place else on the planet. And it seemed as if there was such a close knit way that ex South Carolinians treated each other, even when they didn't know each other, other than they were from South Carolina. Just say that you were from South Carolina, and it struck up a big conversation among the adults. Just listening to them talk. And so that's how I found out that Bumpy Johnson was a real character, because my father got to meet him. I don't know how well he knew him, but Bumpy Johnson, being from South Carolina, my dad always told me he took care of people from South Carolina. They didn't see him in the same way maybe the law enforcement saw. But and what is interesting about that is the basketball player Alex English. His dad lived in New York, and his dad and my dad knew each other very well. And that's how my dad got to meet Bumpy Johnson, through Alex English's dad, who introduced him and took him to one of his clubs. And he said, man treated him very well. And all South Carolina, you from South Carolina? Come on over here. So they had a whole different viewpoint. Africana studies teach you the governance conversation versus the social structure. Well, that governance conversation about Bumpy Johnson was much different than what you read.
Have you watched the dramatization? Do you recognize that characterization of him?
In the one that came on TV that had the series? No, not really. But I also know, because I wasn't old enough to understand what was really going on when all of that was going on. I mean, I've got to be in single digits. They upscaled it. In fact, most of the pictures that they took of the apartment complex he lived in was the condos that my parents lived in. So and those buildings weren't built till 1968. So Bumpy Johnson couldn't have been living in those apartments. But anyway, the person who was the consultant on it, I know very well. I have a personal relationship, Professor James Smalls. And I knew just from conversations he and I had what he was trying to do with the series as the consultant. And so I saw all of the poetic license they were taking. But I think he was trying to show some characters in a different light, while teasing the audience a little bit about governance conversation, as opposed to what the social structure had been saying about people like Bumpy. But it's an interesting thought that if Bumpy and Malcolm had gotten together, I don't know. I mean, but Forrest Whitaker did an outstanding job of trying to show struggle in a social structure that's anti-African, where it only leaves you so many ways of taking care, having a family and taking care of that family.
And that brings our second personal installment to a close. We want to archive something special that was established in 2000, more than 2 decades ago. In upcoming episodes, we will be exploring the history of Christ Universal Temple, its teachings on spirituality and personal growth, and its role in the Columbia, South Carolina community. We invite you to like, comment, and subscribe to receive notifications for future episodes. Thank you for listening.